My mom used to think she was just a normal, pretty, and happy person who was doomed to be alone. She always believed that no one really cared about her. These were the last words Audrey Hepburn's son spoke after years of quiet. They were enough to break down the false image that Hollywood had created of her. People around the world knew Audrey as a beautiful figure, but her son finally confirmed what everyone else had already said. There was never any real desire in her family to have her. She was born with a name her father wouldn't give her. Not only that, but the years she was at her most beautiful on TV were also the years she was in the most pain, which she never talked about. He told her that the fragile beauty that everyone loved was actually shaped by hunger during the war, men who didn't care about her feelings, and the many times she had to put herself back together. That was just a small part. What else was her son going to find out? Let's open the door and see what Audrey Hepburn was really like. 1. My mom never had a good memory with her dad. He didn't care about her, and he never wanted her anyway. The words were very sharp and came from Audrey Hepburn's own son. They really made people chill. The world loved Audrey, but she grew up with a huge mental hole. To understand this, we have to go back to the early 1930s, when Audrey was still a baby and her father had already decided he didn't want to see her. At that time, Brussels was a city with streets made of stone and red brick houses. In the morning, there was a thin fog. The Hepburn family's big villa was in a quiet area. It was the kind of house that made people look up in awe. But there was a chilling coldness behind those beautiful white walls. It looked like Audrey's dad, Joseph Victor Anthony Rustin, was from the top class, but his heart was as cold as a northern wind. Miss Ella van Heemstra. Audrey's mother was a kind person who tried to make people feel loved by giving them wool blankets, afternoon tea, and soft smiles. But it all seemed to go away as soon as Joseph walked through the door. Aubrey cried for the first time on May 4, 1929. In a small hospital in Ixelles. Ella was ready for Joseph to step in and smile at his daughter for the first time, but he never showed up. Even though the hospital was only a few streets away, he stayed in his reading room, where the warm lamp lit up his lifeless face. He sent a short word through a servant. Please follow the rules. Not any flowers or a smile. No first look that every child should get from their dad. That's how Audrey came into the world without her father being there at all. There was still a chill in the air when Ella took Audrey home from school in Belgium. She put the little crib next to the fireplace so Joseph would at least see his child. But when he went downstairs, the sound of his suede shoes hitting the wood floor echoed and stopped for a moment in front of the cradle. It gave Ella the creeps when he looked at it with such a cold gaze. After that, he left, acting like there was no one lying there. You should hold her, right? Ella asked in a shaking voice. That's what Joseph said without stopping to look. There is no need or care. There was neither interest nor recognition, only coldness, as if Audrey were a meaningless item that had just been brought into the house. Ella asked what the baby's name was that night. What do you think she should be called? Joseph looked at his wine glass and replied straight out, anything. Ella did figure out that he didn't want Audrey to exist, as you asked. He was trying to hide the child's presence by not touching anything that had to do with her. Audrey Hepburn, who would become a Hollywood star, had a rough start in life when her father turned her down. She did everything she could in the beginning to keep Audrey from feeling this cold. But even very little kids know when they are not loved. Audrey would run through the big house with her bright drawings in her hands when she was 4 years old. Aubrey would run toward Joseph with hopeful eyes whenever he was reading the paper in the living room. Dad, take a look at what I drew. But Joseph either didn't move his head or gave a small nod before reading again. Audrey wanted compliments, a smile, or a soft pat on the head. She stopped for a moment each time and then took a few slow steps away. Her long shadow on the floor seemed to swallow her small body. Dance class was the first place where Audrey really felt good. She felt like she existed in the small room, where she wore her soft dress and shoes. Dad had a different view, though. The hall was filled with warm golden lights for her winter recital in 1934. People in the crowd cheered as the girls spun around on stage. With worry, Ella looked over at the seats where Joseph was sitting. He came, but he sat in the very last row, away from everyone else. What was even worse was that he picked up the newspaper and started reading at the exact same time that his daughter performed on stage for the very first time. Audrey turned around to look for her dad's face in the crowd. She looked around and only saw a guy hunched over a page. He didn't know that his daughter was shining just a few steps away. Europe was in a lot of political trouble from 1935 to 1936. As a result of his involvement with extremist groups, Joseph went on long trips and attended hidden meetings. Ella saw that she was in danger and backed away. But Joseph got cooler and colder. He stayed away from his wife, his daughter, who was young and didn't know much about politics, and his family. She would run to show him her new doll, tell him school stories, or show him a new dance routine. Every time, Joseph walked right past her, as if she weren't there. After that, the war started. When German troops came into the Netherlands in 1940, Audrey was only 11 years old. Her family was stuck because of the war. This winter, Audrey curled up in a bomb shelter. Her stomach hurt from eating rotten bread, potato peels, and even boiled flower bulbs to stay alive. The roof shook every time something went off. A lot of people hugged Audrey to keep her warm. Even when they were so close to danger, Audrey's dad wasn't there at all. He didn't write messages or call to see if his daughter was okay. There was no sign that he cared. Nothing. After many years, Audrey's son finally said what many people had been guessing. My grandpa never wrote a single letter to check on my mother during the war. They only knew that Joseph had left the Netherlands for London and was living with someone else. There was no goodbye, no statement, and no regret. Audrey was only a little girl when she heard the news. She stood still for a few minutes. She didn't cry. She only looked out the window at the heavy snowfall and whispered, "He doesn't need to come back to me." At that moment, she knew she was a child no one ever wanted. During a recent conversation, her son Sean Ferrer said that everything was true. From birth until she was an adult, my mom never had any good memories with her dad. There was not a single hug, no compliment, or moment of joy. He wasn't at all a part of her life in any way. What does it mean for a child to grow up being rejected like this? A hole, a need, a wound that never heals. People all over the world admired Audrey Hepburn, but she turned to other guys to fill that void. But she didn't know that those guys would hurt her more than her dad's silence. 2. Audrey grew up without her dad's love, so she tried to fill the void with other guys. But her search led her to 2 marriages that were worse than the silence of her father. What Sean Ferrer said wasn't just a surprise, it proved that Audrey Hepburn's pain did not end when she was a child. It followed her as an adult in the form of the guys she thought would keep her safe. Audrey became an adult while always looking for love. When the only father she had ever known didn't love her, she desperately looked for love somewhere else. So, after her first relationship ended, Audrey really thought she wasn't good enough for love that would last. She was so afraid of being left alone that one turnaround could break her world all over again. It was early in Audrey's work when she met Mel Ferrer. At first, he made her feel safe. Ferrer was smart, skilled, and had a calmness that was almost complete that allowed him to lead others. But that same peace turned into a wall that Audrey couldn't see. People who saw them together said that Audrey always looked smaller when she was with Ferrer. It was like she had to get smaller to fit the shape he made for her. Often, Ferrer changed Audrey's lines on set, sometimes right before the camera rolled. Sometimes he would stand right behind the lens and look at her the whole time. She was afraid to slip even once. Friends remembered that Audrey had a beautiful, soft smile on her face whenever Ferrer was around, but her eyes didn't look like Joy's. Those eyes showed that someone was trying too hard to make other people happy that she forgot about herself. While shooting The Unforgiven in 1959, she lost a child who had not yet been born. This was the worst thing that ever happened to her. She once said that nothing could compare to the pain. Audrey's emotions broke down, and her heart fell apart. But the filming plan kept going even though she needed time to heal. The pressure kept up. Being responsible, Audrey had to go back in front of the camera even though her heart was still broken because of work. Everyone saw that Audrey looked smaller, more fragile, and more delicate after that terrible event, but no one knew how badly it hurt her. Even though Audrey and Ferrer were married for 14 years, their breakup left a deep hole in her heart. She gently left that marriage and moved to homes in the country, hoping that the peace and quiet would help heal what had been broken for over a decade. But then she met Andrea Deddy, the second man, who made her cry even more. At first, Deddy seemed like a breath of fresh air. He was young, friendly, and full of Italian energy. That's what Audrey saw in him, a stable family life. And the wish to have a child again. Audrey thought she had finally found peace when she found out she was pregnant with Luca. The nice days didn't last long, though. People said that Dottie started looking for relationships after the wedding. Strange people were seen in reports about their home. Audrey once came back before she was supposed to, and all she saw was the back door quietly swaying. It looked like someone had quickly left. Audrey did not question, scold, or raise her voice. She did nothing but stand in the empty room and listen to her heart break again. Friends of Audrey's said that Dottie was the only person who ever made her cry more. What broke my heart the most was that she stayed for years longer so her son could have a full family, which she had never had. Her son stood there and watched everything. One time he said something that made people gasp for air. "My mom always picked strong, far-away guys like her dad. They always hurt her in the end." There was a guy named Audrey's father who cast a long shadow over both Ferrer and Dottie. That shadow was with her from the time she was a child through the 2 marriages she worked so hard to keep together. Audrey Hepburn, who was known for her soft beauty, went through a lot of pain that no actress could ever play. She would carry those shadows with her in her mind for the rest of her life, even though they came from the past. But the hurts from her father and her 2 bad marriages were not the only ones. What went on in Audrey's mind was much worse. 3. It was best to see my mom without a mirror in front of her. Because every time she did, she saw things that no one else did, and those things hurt her forever. The things that Audrey Hepburn's son said didn't just let a secret out. They took off the soft veil that had been covering her beautiful face for decades. Few people knew this, but the woman who was once called one of the most beautiful women of the century didn't like her body. People thought Audrey Hepburn was the most beautiful woman in the world because of her soft, doe-like eyes, polished features, and slim body. However, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the goddess that Hollywood praised or the beauty that captivated the world. She saw a woman whose legs were too big for her body, whose nose wasn't the right shape, whose shoulders were too small, and whose eyes were too sad. Audrey thought that her thinness was a sign of her wartime hunger, a memory of the times when she lived off of tulip bulbs and stale bread. She once said that her body wasn't a gift from fate, but rather the result of not getting enough food, being afraid, and pushing herself too far. It was so painfully ironic that Hollywood made being thin a new measure of beauty. At the same time, Audrey only saw it as a painful memory. Audrey once turned away from the press when they called her a perfect icon and whispered to a family member, "If they saw what I look like without makeup, they'd probably be disappointed." One small comment that made Audrey feel very insecure: she was always afraid that people would see her flaws. That fear followed her around all day. A lot of artists enjoy the sound of cameras flashing. For Audrey, it was a reflection of how well she needed to hide her fears. But those worries were only a small part of what was going on inside her. Audrey lost a lot of babies, but the one in 1959 was the worst. It made her feel very sad. She would sneak into her room, shut the door, and lie still for hours. She didn't want to eat or talk some days. Instead, she just sat by the window and watched the rain, not even sure what she was seeing. Friends said that Audrey seemed to change after each loss. She became quieter, more afraid, and more likely to blame herself. Every wound she got turned into an emotional scar on top of the fear of being left alone that she had had since she was a kid. That's why Audrey never liked the party's champagne glam style or the bright lights of Hollywood. She said that fancy galas were parades of fake smiles where everyone laughed loudly but no one dared to show how lonely they were. When Audrey got home, she was more relaxed. She liked to read, cook, water plants, learn new desserts, and sit in her yard and listen to the wind. A lot of people were shocked to learn that Holly didn't eat breakfast at Tiffany's. The woman who looked beautiful at fancy parties didn't like being fancy in real life. Audrey once turned down dozens of calls to galas so she could stay home, make tea, and read Dickens. She told her manager, "I don't belong in Hollywood," at one point. "I'm part of kinder things." Her son also said the same thing. More than anything else, my mom wanted her life to be normal. For her, peace was more important than fame. She always looked for peace, though, and never quite found it. Because she was afraid of being left behind, it was like a ghost following her. In the beginning, her father never looked at her. It grew through painful marriages and stayed with her until the end. Audrey would sometimes turn her head quickly, even when she was being very quiet, as if she wanted to see if someone had left. People who lived with her said it was an unconscious habit, like a child who was too used to being left behind having to act quickly to stay alive. Even though she smiled brightly, Audrey's soul was deeply alone. It was a gentle loneliness that wasn't sad, but it was deep enough that she never really felt like she belonged in the world of lights. And that's what people never saw, a woman who was stunningly beautiful but had a heart full of wounds she was afraid to touch. But there was one last truth that no one, not even Audrey's friends and family, saw coming, and her son confirmed it. 4. I didn't think my mom was a goddess. She was just a woman who tried to get by being kind. Sean Ferrer's words were like a key that opened the last piece of Audrey Hepburn's life. That piece made all of Hollywood's glitz and glamour look small in comparison to who she really was. She was a light to everyone. But she saw that light as nothing more than a thin shell over a life that had never really belonged on stage. The truth is that Audrey already wanted to stop acting just a few years after she became famous. Because she never really loved movies as much as many people thought she would. It was just a way for her to make money after her dancing dream fell through, and it gave her a place to stay while she healed from her wounds. She never thought of it as the end goal. Audrey only wanted a peaceful home, from the time her father ignored her to the time she was at the top of her fame. Her father never gave her one, and neither of her first 2 marriages could give her one. That's maybe why, when the flashlights went out, she always went back to her most basic self-cooking routine, putting on an old sweater and walking back to her house to pick flowers in the yard. That's when she really breathed. For this reason, when Audrey gave her all to UNICEF, a lot of people suddenly realized she wasn't just trying to look good. She did it because she knew what to do. Before she became a star, she was a hungry child during the war who lived on tulip bulbs in bomb bunkers while shaking. She once said, "I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be lost." Those words were not campaign lines. That was a memory. Scars made of flesh and blood that never went away. Sean once said something that shocked a lot of people. "My mom wasn't naturally beautiful. She worked at it. It was how she stayed alive." Audrey wasn't gentle because she had never been hurt. She decided to live with softness instead because she had been hurt too much. It was how she kept herself safe, a thin shell over a heart that was full of holes. In her later years, Audrey decided to leave Hollywood and live alone in Switzerland. Many people thought she was withdrawing because she was getting older. Her son, on the other hand, said the real reason was something else. Audrey was worn out from the pain. Tired of marriages that aren't working out. Tired from trying so hard to look perfect. Tired from being alone all the time since she was a child. Audrey didn't really live as herself until she met Robert Wolders, who she thought was the last true love of her life. There are no demands, standards, or controls. There is only peace. Robert was not the kind of guy who would make her shy away. She could breathe when she was with him. She also said, "Those were the happiest years of my life." But even after she was at peace, her son still wanted everyone to know one thing. "You couldn't call my mom a queen. Do not honor her. Think of her as a woman who has been hurt but has chosen to be kind." When she told the truth, everyone could finally prove what they already knew: she was lonely, weak, and had a tenderness that seemed too soft to be an accident. It wasn't that Audrey was perfect that made her beautiful. Even though she lived in ruin, she decided to shine, which made her beautiful. And maybe Hollywood really does bow down to that kind of shine. When Audrey Hepburn's life is looked at without the glitz, it's not that of a perfect goddess walking around in the sunlight. It tells the story of a woman who was rejected as a child and grew up during a war. She loved deeply but was hurt by the people she trusted the most. A woman who is afraid of being left behind but treats her with kindness anyway. Physically weak, but quietly strong in ways that not many people knew about. And her son proved what everyone else had felt. Audrey wasn't trouble-free, flawless, or immune to harm. She was just beautiful in the way that a broken heart can still love. Not because she shone, but because she decided to light a small flame in the dark. That may be why she became an icon. Not only on screen, but also in the way she turned her pain into acts of kindness. Audrey Hepburn will live on. You lived a life that wasn't flashy but left a light brighter than any star. If today's story helped you see Audrey Hepburn in a more real and human way, please hit like to help the channel bring you more stories about the people behind Hollywood legends. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the shocking stories and hidden facts about famous people who used to be famous. What do you think about Audrey's life? What do you think was the most painful thing she had to go through? Write what you think below. We love hearing your point of view. We'll see you next time.